All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. We're really, really excited to share with you the results of our study. We actually did last November, and we had people actually create their own conversational agents, program them, and investigate how that kind of changed their perceptions of these agents and specifically trust. And so we had people, children actually, and we also had their parents, we had people from different countries. Specifically, we're looking at weird countries versus non-weird countries. And so weird stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic countries, kind of like US, Canada, and New Zealand. And so I'll pass it over to Maura to talk more about the actual interface we use to allow people to program these agents.
Thank you, Jess. So to give a brief overview of the Alexa interface and what the students can make of it, we actually have a short video demonstrating the interaction between a user, the Alexa skill she made, and an app she created.
So this skill is called Talking Cookbook, and basically you can ask Echo Dot how to make certain recipes and it'll tell you the instructions. So let's give it a try. Alexa, ask Talking Cookbook what's the first step to make banana bread?
The first step is to preheat the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, 175 degrees Celsius.
Alexa, ask Talking Cookbook what's the next step?
Crack an egg into the mixing bowl.
You can see that the skill also caused something to show up on the app we developed in App Inventor. The skill can be accessed on an Alexa device like I did here on the Alexa app, or even in the App Inventor interface itself.
And so the App Inventor Alexa interface allows low-code skill building and easy connecting to the skill to a custom-made app in App Inventor. And so in the workshop, we gave this interface to students as a tool for them to develop their own conversational agents. And as much as people can create conversational agents to make positive change in their communities, which is what we aim to do at App Inventor, unfortunately, agents can also be used to spread misinformation, manipulate users' preferences, and invade privacy. While this is true of nearly every information technology, it's especially true of conversational agents since they can be personified, and people can build relationships with them just like with humans. Researchers have actually shown that people's relationships with agents can be modeled in the same way as people's relationships with other humans. And they've also shown that there's a correlation between increased trust of agents and relationship building with them. And so because of this, right now, there's a lot of research investigating agents and trust, but there's little research investigating this in terms of children and how or why they might trust agents, as well as people from countries that aren't well represented in this research. There's also very little research investigating how having these people actually program the agents might affect their perceptions of trust, despite how people, including children, are programming these devices today. So our goal is to do just this, to investigate how people's perceptions of agents change as they program them, and to figure out how we can foster healthier understanding of agents through better agent and pedagogy design. And so in our study, we compare children's perceptions with adults' perceptions, as well as those from weird and non-weird countries, as Jess described. And so more specifically, these are the 4 research questions that we investigated. The first has to do with investigating people of various backgrounds, trust of agents, specifically looking at the aspect of correctness. And since we're interested in the potential for agents to spread misinformation. And so in this presentation, we'll be focusing on this particular question and how people's trust of agents can inform how we develop conversational agents and related pedagogy. And so to address this first research question, we gave participants surveys with Likert scales, with questions that had Likert scales, like the ones on this slide. So for example, it would say conversational agents, for example, Siri, Alexa, Google Home, say things that are ... And always right is on one end of the Likert scale and always wrong is on the other end. So taking all of this data, we compared individuals' answers before and after different activities throughout the workshops in order to gain a better understanding of that first question. So yeah, I'm going to pass it off to Nee to talk about the workshops themselves.
Thanks, Maura. So in order to investigate the research question, we conducted 2 sets of the 2-day workshops, one for students from weird countries and then one for students from non-weird countries. So on the first day, we provided tutorials using Alexa and App Inventor for participants to build their own carbon footprint calculator, where students could either follow the tutorial along with the group, or they could go ahead and read the tutorials on their own, as well as complete extra tutorials. Additionally, on the first day, we had idea sessions for students and parents to think about what their ideal conversational agent would look like, sound like, phrases they would use, and topics that they can discuss. And at the end of this first day, we also gave a brief demonstration on how to create a back and forth conversation with Alexa. On the second day, this was primarily societal impact activities. So participants would discuss sustainability topics, and given the knowledge that they gained from their experience with AI from the first day, they were given the challenge to see how AI could improve the future. And then at the end of the second day, the participants would present their ideas. And obviously throughout this workshop, we gave in total 3 questionnaires or surveys, one before the first day, one after the first day, and then one at the end of the second day. So on the next slide, we actually see an example of a final project that a student gave at the end of the workshop, which is actually quite amazing. So moving on to actually the demographics of the workshop participants, we see that in this workshop, we had 86 participants who were eligible to take part in the workshop. 45 of them were children and 41 of them were parents. And of those 86 participants, we had 49 of them complete at least one of the three surveys that were used for analysis. And then of those 49 participants, we had 54% of them identify as male, 43% of them identify as female, and 2% of them identify as non-binary. In another subset with the 49 participants, we had 54% of them from weird countries and 46% of them from non-weird countries. If we move on to the next slide, we see the country representation breakdown of the participants. So as you can see, there's a large majority of participants coming from Indonesia, which is a non-weird country. Another portion that was quite large was the US, taking up 28% of them, which was a weird country. And then we had the remaining, such as Singapore, Canada, New Zealand, Japan, India, and Iran making up the remaining. For the final demographic that we wanted to show was we wanted to measure the means of 4 categories between 2 subsets, which were weird and non-weird. So as we can see from the graph, the category of English as the first language is the only one that has statistical significance. So after going over all these demographics, I'm going to pass off to Jess to discuss our major findings from the workshop.
Great, thanks, Nee. So really excited to share with you about the results. However, quickly wanted to go over our research scope. And so as Nee said, we have a big group of people from Indonesia. We also had a big group of people from the United States. And so that was kind of our demographics for this particular study. And we'd love to do another follow-up study that had kind of a more diverse set of participants in those categories of weird and non-weird. And then in terms of the agent we actually used and we programmed, it was the Amazon-based agent. I'm just going to refer to it as agent or agents. But when I do say that, I do mean that particular agent. I'm not using the name just in case I trigger people's devices. And then in terms of that agent, the voice defaulted to female. And so that could definitely skew or bias feelings towards the agent. And so it'd be really, really interesting to do another follow-up study where we actually had like a male voice, for instance. And then one other thing I wanted to mention was that when I say trust, I'm specifically talking about trust in terms of correctness of the agent. So how much does someone believe that the agent is actually saying something correct or right back to the person? And I also wanted to mention about trust before I go to this slide, that what we want to do with this research is really help people have healthy levels of trust towards these agents. However, what we don't look into is what that healthy level of trust actually is. And so that's another study we would love to look into in the future. Also wanted to mention just the statistical tests we use. They depended on whether the data was normal, kind of the distribution, as well as the independence of the data. And then in the bottom right, you can see the different significance scores and symbols we're using on our graphs to signify that. On this graph, however, I didn't add the little stars because there were so many significant differences. And so what we saw here was that technology was typically kind of across the board trusted more than humans. And when I say that, I'm particularly talking about this question we asked where we said, hey, on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you trust Google, for instance, to give you the correct information? And so participants actually trusted Amazon agent and Google more than their parents and friends, kind of across the board. That being said, there were also significant differences within subsets of the groups of people. So specifically, when I look at this graph, I'm looking at the blue line, which has to do with people who had no prior experience learning AI. And so in this case, these people, they actually increased their trust after going through the programming activity. So as they learned to program, their trust of agents increased. And it was interesting because that was different from people who had prior AI learning or experience. And so we think this could have something to do with kind of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where if you have no prior experience or knowledge, your opinions might change a lot more than if you had previous AI experience. And with that, I also wanted to show you just kind of the distribution. I'll be using these kind of graphs in the rest of the presentation. So you can see at the top in this graph, we have the pre-test, and then at the bottom, we have the survey that occurred after the programming activity. And so you can see that for people with no prior AI experience, their trust actually shifted to the right, which is towards more trust. And this was another interesting result. So this is looking at children versus parents after the programming activity. So after the programming activity, we saw that children actually trusted agents more than parents did. And so learning to program, that's kind of the result that occurred. And prior to the programming experience, we didn't see this significant difference. And again, that could be something to do with an Dunning-Kruger effect, where children have less general knowledge than parents or something like that. But we'll get into the reasons that people actually said for why their trust changed in a little bit. Another interesting result has to do with what language people are using to interact with the agents. So the top bar there is for people who are using a language other than their first language to interact with the agent. And they actually distrusted or were much more skeptical of agents than people who are using their first language. And this kind of makes sense. So for example, if it was me and I was using French, which is not my first language, to interact with an agent, I would probably not have the best accent. The agent probably wouldn't understand me very well. And so I might distrust agents a little bit more. What was really interesting about this, though, was that after the programming activity, after they learned to program these agents, that difference disappeared. There's no significant difference after that experience. And so now we're zooming in specifically just on the weird participants' trust, or people from weird countries like the US, like Canada, etc. And we had a really interesting result here because their perceptions of trust actually decreased when they learned to program and through the entire workshops. So there's a significant difference pre-test, post-test, and actually decrease their trust. Then another interesting result was, again, just with those people from weird countries, we saw a difference between males and females. And this difference wasn't seen in the non-weird category. And same with this difference, actually, it was just with those folks from weird countries. And so there's a difference between males, and females were much more skeptical of agents than males before the programming activity. In terms of the reasoning, what people said for why they actually trust it or their changed trust through the workshops, we had many different themes. So we did a thematic analysis, and these are like the top 5 themes that came out of that analysis. So you can see in the top left, this had to do with like personal learning, something that people learned through the workshops. They didn't necessarily what it was. The one next to it is all about learning about how agents were programmed. And then if you go to the bottom left, it's another kind of education related one. So people learned that where this agent was getting their source of information. And so those 3 themes in particular, which were the largest in the group, are really awesome kind of for our research because we have this educational perspective and we really want people to be able to learn about agents and better understand them so that they can better calibrate their trust towards these agents. So I'll let actually Claire talk more about the design recommendations we have for both agents and educational activities because of these results.
Thank you, Jess. So we'll talk about our design recommendations, both for conversational agents and for our educational activities. So based on the results Jess just showed, we can see that different people trust agents differently. Therefore, our first recommendation is that agents should be designed to foster appropriate trust levels according to the application and the audience. So first of all, in terms of the audience, this might mean thinking about how children trust agents more than adults, and how males from weird countries trust agents more than females did. In terms of the application, this means thinking about how pedagogical agents might require more trust in order for students to learn effectively from them, whereas other applications, like applications that give web search results, might need qualifiers so that people don't end up over-trusting them. This fostering an appropriate level of trust could be done in many different ways. And this, we think, will be a big area of research moving forward. For example, this could be done through direct explanation. Like this I'm confident about this agent because. This could also be done through diction to indicate the different trust levels, using words like probably and likely not. This could also be done through personification, but this should be used with caution, as there's a lot of work going into how personification can influence people's decision-making. We also saw how it's not just the agents that interacts with people that affects people's trust, but also the other activities, like our programming and social impact activities. So the next recommendation is to design activities to foster appropriate levels of trust and tailor this to the audience, since different activities affect different people differently. For example, we saw that those who hadn't learned AI before trusted agents more after the programming activity, whereas we didn't see any effect for those who had learned AI before. We also saw that there's a significant decrease in the level of trust for the agent from participants from weird countries after going through the workshops, but we didn't see any effect from those from non-weird countries. And Jess will finally sum up our results and our recommendations.
Awesome, thanks, Claire. So as a very, very brief overview, our recommendations are to design agents to foster appropriate levels of trust and also design activities to foster appropriate levels of trust. And this really depends on the audience of the educational activities as well as the agents. So it's a good idea to think deeply about that. And if you'd like to reach out to any of us, our email addresses are all down below. I will be defending my thesis later on in July. And so if you're interested in kind of coming to that, seeing more of the results and more of kind of this educational idea about conversational agents, definitely feel free to message me and come to that. So thank you again for listening. And now we'll have some time for questions.